Hello guys and welcome to this Volks Wizard video. Now today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to show you around a car or do a review of any sort. I'm actually going to do some work. As you can see behind me, here is my Volkswagen Up GTI. Now I've had this car for about 2.5 months. I've done 1,800 miles in it and I think it's about time to have an oil change. Now I know the official interval is 1 year or 10,000 miles and 1,800 is a little bit low, but the reason I do this is because when an engine's brand new and you bed it in, little bits of metal can get into the oil from the bedding in process, and it's really good to get them out of the engine as soon as possible. So I like to do a running in oil change between about 1,000 and 2,000 miles on my cars, and it's never done me any harm in the past, so I'll continue to do it with the Up GTI. Now the benefit of the Up GTI is that it's very easy to do, and I'm sure any DIY owner with a trolley jack and a few basic tools can do it. So without any further ado, let's get this Up GTI into the workshop and go and give it its first ever oil change. Okay guys, before we put the car in the workshop and get the horrible old oil out of it, I want to do something now that I often forget to do until the car's in the air and my fingers are covered in oil, and that's have a look through the pristine white owner's manual handbook and see exactly what it says about the oil that we should be using. So I've got the page open here. It's page 161 in my manual. It says engine oil standards, and for petrol engines with particulate filter, which is what the Up GTI has got, if you want to run long life servicing, you need to use oil that's approved to VW's 50800 standard or 50400 standard. It does say if you use 50400, the emission values of the vehicle may deteriorate slightly, which means it's probably going to use more fuel. I don't really want to do long life anyway. I just want to do an oil change that will last up until the 1 year or 10,000 mile mark, and for that I can use 50200 approved oil. Now I've got on the workbench some Long Life 3, which is Volkswagen's sort of mainstay oil. Every car's been using it for many years now. I'm not sure what grade that is now, but we'll have a look later. What I have actually done some homework on is find out how much oil needs to go in the car. This is another one of those things like oil grade that is sometimes quite hard to find out when you're in the middle of doing the job. But I contacted a good friend at Volkswagen and he's told me that it's got the sheet off the system they use in the dealers. You probably won't be able to see this, I'll put it on the screen now, but it says the DKRA engine of the Up GTI, which is 85 kilowatts, takes 4 litres of oil when you're doing a change with the oil filter, which is different to what I read on the internet, so it's just as well. I checked. Another little tip is to use the trip computer to just check the car's up to temperature, so you want the oil as warm as possible so it drains thoroughly. We're using the trip computer to find out what the coolant temperature is, and oil temperature and coolant temperature roughly relate to each other, but operating temperature is 90 degrees coolant, and that's what we've got bang on here. And as you can see down there, we're on 1,800 miles, which is a bit higher than the 1,000 that I normally like to do these changes at, but it's still a lot lower than the 10,000 miles that the dealer would have changed your oil at. So without any further ado, let's get this Up GTI into the workshop and get that oil out of it. Okay, as you can see, the Up GTI is now in the workshop. It's all lined up, ready to be raised on the vehicle lift. I should point out the rear jacking points are potentially a problem for some people because right next to the jacking point is an underbody tray, like a big bit of black plastic that's like a liner for the floor underneath the car. If you put your trolley jack in too far, you could end up jacking it up on that, which will undoubtedly do some damage. So if you go to a tyre place to get a puncture or a new tyre, just make sure they're not going to make that mistake because it could prove really expensive. Now, before we lift this car up in the air, I want to do something that I often forget to do when I'm doing an oil change, and it's really annoying to have to do it when the car's up in the air, and that is to take the dipstick out of its tube and take the oil filler cap off, because doing that helps gravity give you a better drain, and that's what it's all about. So, as you can see, I've raised the bonnet already. You have to do that on the passenger side on a UK car because I haven't swapped it over for right-hand drive. So that's the dipstick there. It's got a yellow handle, you can't miss it. Put that somewhere clean. And then the oil filler cap, just turn it anti-clockwise. Beware, because it might be very hot under here because you've had the engine up to operating temperature. So that's it then, it's ready to get it up in the air. So let's raise this Up GTI in the air.
I hear the asteroids flying by, so this could be your last goodbye.
Okay, there we have the Up GTI in the air. Now, I've not seen the underneath of this car, so I'll give you a quick tour. Before we do that though, I should say, if you're going to lift your car up at home when you're going to work on the car, just be very careful that it's safe and you're not going to have any accidents with things falling down on you while you're working on it. So use a good trolley jack, make sure you use axle stands, make sure the car's stable, make sure it's not going to roll away, make sure you're working on flat ground. Just be very careful. Okay, so this is the torsion beam rear axle. We haven't had a torsion beam on a Golf since the Mark IV. It's a very basic way of doing things, but at this price point, one cannot argue when they've done a really good job. It's always a good time to check tyres for punctures, and this one's all good. I mean, the suspension does crash a lot, it does bottom out and does seem to put a lot of shocks through the wheels, so it's also a good idea to check with the front ones that they're not buckled, because it does make some awful noises on not particularly sharp potholes. But no, that one looks okay. Again, you're checking for bulges as well, so just look down the sidewall, make sure nothing's sticking out, because that could lead to a blowout. That's looking good, and that was the passenger side one, so that's the most likely one to be buckled. But no, that one's fine as well. Again, no damage on the inner edge. Oh, and then the outer edge we must check. No, it's all good. So yeah, it can make some noises from bottoming out, but it seems to survive. Okay, where's the engine? Oh yeah, there it is, right. So your oil filter is just here. Just this grey thing here. Is that not the easiest oil filter to work on when you've got the car in the air anyway? And that's your sump plug there, so they're really close, and you can probably drain them simultaneously if you use the right sort of thing to drain into. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, very simple. So this is the bit I was telling you about earlier, where if you go too far over, you'll be jacking it on this bit, which is going to break, let's face it, so just be very careful. And again, there it is on that side, so yeah, it's all right for you being careful, but you just need to keep an eye on tyre fitters, because I know what they're like, and they'll be jacking it on there. So yeah, basic, but it does the job. Now, before the winter, or even before the autumn, I'm going to get my hands on some ACF 50 spray and cover all this stuff in it. It's like a real thick wax that's clear, and it sets clear, and it protects all these rather flimsily painted areas from corroding, because after one winter, even after some wet, luckily it's been dry over the 2.5 months I've had this car, all this area will just go start corroding. So yeah, ACF 50, you can get it on eBay. I think it's about 15 quid, and it's brilliant stuff. Got it on my Club Sport S, and it's done wonders down there. I hate all this stuff corroding, because it's just never worth sort of powder coating it and making it nice again. So if you can avoid it happening, that's a relatively cheap way of doing it. I did it to my Club Sport S while it was on the ramp at the dealers before I drove away in it when it was brand new. Okay, without any further ado, let's get draining. So this is my oil drainer. It should be able to take 4 litres. Before spilling all on the floor, right, so let's get the oil out while it's nice and warm. 19mm ratchet onto the socket. So we're going anti-clockwise. The benefit of a factory tightening the sump plug, it isn't very tight, it's just how it should be, and it's just like wheel bolts. When you get a car from the factory, the wheel bolts are about half as tight as tyre fitters seem to think is necessary, so that's good. Okay, now, some people reuse these, but I'm going to replace it. Let's just lift this up a bit. Again, if I look a bit badly organised, it's because I'm only using one hand to do everything, so let's just wind that out. Now it's going to be hot, so just be really careful. But I'm not going to reuse this plug, so I can let it drop. The oil will come out quite a lot further initially, so yeah, got that. Obviously as it drains, it's going to go to the left, so we just need to move it over a little bit. Okay guys, it's been about 20 minutes since the oil started to drain out, and it's nearly finished, but in the meantime we can get the oil filter off. Now to do that you need a special tool that looks like this. It fits over the end of the oil filter and grips it, and then you can turn it anti-clockwise and it comes off. It's exactly the same as the ones on Mark II Golf, strangely, although the filter looks a little bit shorter. So let's just get that on there. Now if I look really clumsy, it's because I've got a camera in my hand. So that's actually gone on quite well. So turn it anti-clockwise, and there we go. There's not really much room, so I haven't used a ratchet because once it's loose, you can do it by hand anyway. It should start to drain under the bottom. Yeah, should start to drain there. So make sure you've got something to catch it in, and then keep winding it out. It's very, very thin, that oil, so it's obviously quite a high grade for emissions, because the thinner the oil, the less effort the engine has to make to go through it. You know, everything flows more easily within the engine if the oil's thinner. Not necessarily good for protection, especially when the engine's hot, but yeah, it should make it more efficient, and I guess the nearly 70 miles per gallon I've been getting might be to do with this oil. While that's draining, we'll just have a look at the oil we're going to use. So it's Quantum, which is Volkswagen's own UK brand for oil. It's made by Fuchs, a German company anyway, as it says German technology made in Britain, and it's 530 Long Life 3. Now, as you remember from earlier, it said you could use a 50400, but with a loss, slightly reduction, detrimental effect on emissions. But it's 50400 there, so it's perfectly suitable for the car. Be interesting to see what it does, or what the car was with originally. Actually, it might have not even had 50800 in it, though I suspect it had. So this might be a lower grade oil, but it's still a very good oil, especially if you're only doing short service intervals. Like this is going to have an oil change in 8,000 miles anyway. Right, let's see how that filter's doing. So it's pretty much drained. There is a risk of it running down your arm now, but no, it looks all right. I'm pretty sure they've allowed enough room to get the filter out. They wouldn't be that stupid, would they? Yeah, nearly down my arm. Okay, and then that's in there. So leave that to drain because there's still a lot of oil in there. Okay guys, so that's the old oil filter off. We're getting there now. Before we put the new one on, we need to clean the area with some tissue, because sometimes you get bits of dirt on there, and when the filter's been on for a while, you can get the rubber seal actually sticking on. I've had that before, so you just need to give it a clean off and then just check it's all good. Obviously it's still nearly new, so you're not going to get too much of a problem, but when the car's done higher mileage, it's more important to just check the mating face where the rubber seal on the new one goes is perfect. So this is the filter. Its part number is 04E115561H. Might be different on your car, so best to check. As always, you should rub a bit of new oil on the seal there, which means that it seals better on the block, and then just put that on. Now obviously thread it on in a clockwise direction. A lot of people do this by hand, and they, you get a feel for when the filter's sat correctly, but we're going to use a torque wrench in a sec to set it to 20 Newton meters. Okay, so the filter's on hand tight. We're now going to tighten it up fully with the torque wrench, and that's all you saw earlier. It's set to 20 Newton meters, so that's all ready. The thing about a torque wrench is that you set the correct torque on it, the amount of force you need to tighten it, and then when it gets to that point, it clicks to let you know that it's there. So you can't go wrong. You just have to look after your torque wrench though, because they're very sensitive instruments, so dropping them and abusing them means that you might end up with them out of calibration. So did you hear that click? I can do it again. There you go, so that's 20 Newton meters, so we know that's bang on. So all we've got to do now is try and get the torque wrench off. All we've got to do now is put the sump plug in. That's very important, don't forget that, because yeah, you might have a bit of a mess on your hands, and then put some oil in. Okay, now to refit the sump plug, or to fit a new sump plug actually. So this is a brand new sump plug. It's very hard to get these, which makes me wonder if anybody actually bothers changing them. I buy them in bulk from eBay. February Oil sounds like an original quality brand, and they cost quite a lot actually, about £1.50 each, but I just want the peace of mind of knowing that it's brand new, because every time you tighten it up, that washer there crushes, and that's what forms a good seal. And once it's already crushed, well, it isn't going to form as good a seal. So a lot of people get away with not using them, not changing them, I'm sure, but we've got to do a proper job. And with that in mind, we're also going to use a torque wrench to tighten it up to 30 Newton meters. Now again, with the oil filter, you don't need to use a torque wrench, but we're just trying to show best practice. So let's put this on the sump. It's still draining a bit, but it's very slow now, so let's just thread that in. Just make sure you're not cross-threading it, because this sump looks like it's a very fragile aluminium, so make sure you hand tighten it first. It went most of the way in there by hand. So this is a torque wrench set to 30 Newton meters, so let's just put that on there. I've already tightened it by hand, so there you go. Just as with the oil filter, you could hear it click when it got to 30 Newton meters, so total peace of mind now. The only way we can get this wrong is to forget to put oil in, which I obviously have never done before, but some people have. So let's lower the car to the ground and put some oil in the up GTI. Okay, so oil next and we're done. So we've got this can of oil here. It's a 5 litre can and it's still quite full. So we need to get down to here, which is just under 4 litres. You can always put more in really easily, but it's really hard to take it out. So let's just not overdo it, because that's a mistake you can easily make. So I am asking for trouble doing this with one hand, especially if this funnel isn't particularly well secured, but it's okay. The way the oil filler is on these cars, you can't actually push a funnel into it, so it's just sat there, but it's going straight in, so the oil isn't moving it around too much. Okay, that's 4 litres of oil now in the engine. I can show you the can, which is showing just 1 litre left inside it on that mark just there. But of course we need to check, so let's pull the dipstick out, which I put in earlier. I've given it a wipe previously, so it should be nice and clean. And as you can hopefully see, it's right on the max there. If I turn it over, I think it's a little bit easier to see. So that's on the max. So I'll just pop that back in the engine. Okay, because it's important before you start the engine that it's up to the max, because once you start it, it might go down a bit, so you need to check it again. Some people do try and put oil into the oil filter before they start the engine as they're fitting the oil filter to the engine, but because the one on this car goes on like that, as you push it up to the engine, the oil will just pour out all over the block and the floor and make a mess. So you can't do it with this one. So the best you can do is get it up to max, start the engine, let it run for a bit, and then stop it, just check it, and then top it up so it's on the max. But don't forget to put the cap on before you start the engine. Okay, we're in the up GTI now, just going to start the engine for the first time. So clutch down and so all good, no funny noises, although you'd probably be hard pressed to tell on this car because it sounds pretty odd. Anyway, so the next job is to let it run for say 30 seconds and then cut the engine, go back, check the oil, and then top it up to maximum. Make sure you don't go over, because with a catalytic converter car that's bad, but with a car with a petrol particulate filter like this car, that's probably even worse. So just check, be very careful. You can always add more. It's very hard to take oil out. Okay, very last check of the oil, so I'll just pull the dipstick out and show you the right way around. That's probably the way you want to see it. So I don't know if you can see, but there's a little bit of the hatch section showing there, so I'd say it's probably about a couple of 100 mil down, which is perfectly understandable because I don't think this bottle was freshly opened. I think I'd had a bit out of it already, and if you look at the bottle now, you can see it's slightly above. So the funnel's in place. Let's just put a bit more in, but as I say, it's always best to put too little and add a bit more later than to overfill it, so we'll really just give it a quick splash. And that should do. We're so close to the maximum anyway, just being a tiny bit under isn't much of a problem at all, so that's it. Now, while the car's in the workshop, it's always good to just give it a check over as much as you can, and the most important part of that is to check the tyre pressure. To get the pressure that you need to set them to, you look on this sticker that's on the body of the car. Now, there are 3 different settings. One is for when you're carrying 4 people and a lot of luggage, but you've got 2 with when the car's only partially loaded. And the reason there are 2 is because the middle one is for comfort setting. So you can actually run 4 psi lower on the comfort settings to make the car a bit more comfortable. It will use a bit more fuel, but it will handle a little bit better, and the the ride comfort will be probably noticeably better as well. Now, I couldn't remember what I'd set mine to, because when I got this car, the tyre pressures were too high. They were in transit mode. I think they were 3.3 bar instead of 2.4 and 2.2, or 3 bar. They were still massively over. So I'm sure I put them down to 2.4 and 2.2. I've just checked them, they're still 2.4 and 2.2. But it's worth checking your car and just making sure what the PDI technician set them to, because as I say, with my car they didn't do anything, but with yours they might have set them to the higher one, and you might find it drives a lot better on the lower setting, which is 35 psi front, 32 back. Okay, this is the final phase of my Up GTI checkover, and what we're going to do is perform a diagnostic scan. Now, I've been using VCDS diagnostic software for nearly 20 years and it's brilliant. It costs a few £100, but if you use it regularly like me, it's a bargain, and they do a DIY one now for people who don't use it as often. So what we're going to do is an auto scan where the computer will automatically run through every module on the car. In this case, I think there are about 8 or 10, which isn't a lot. Like a Golf could probably be 20 or more. And you've got engine, ABS, steering angle sensor, auto, heating, ventilation and comfort, which is the climate control system this car's got, and a few others. But when it comes back with a black screen like now, it means there aren't any faults, so it's pointless carrying on. You might as well escape out of that, and that's job done. So I hope you've enjoyed this, folks, with a video of checking over your Up GTI. If you have, give it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe, and there'll be some more Up GTI content coming very soon. I'm going to do a likes and dislikes video probably over the next week, so it's worth keeping an eye on that, because that should be quite good. So see you for the next one soon. Cheers.